I think I started the first Melbourne Underground Film Festival as just a reaction. It was kind of reactionary against the status quo at the Melbourne International Film Festival. My film had been rejected from the Melbourne International Film Festival. I wrote this outraged letter in an internet film journal called Filmnet, and I received about 50 replies from other filmmakers in Melbourne who said, you know, they made a lesbian film, or they made like a horror movie, or they made a science fiction film, and James Wan was one of them. James Wan and Shannon Young were one of them who made Stygian, this low-budget horror movie at the time. And I just said to them all, well, all these films sound fantastic. You're all accepted. I'm going to put on a festival of all this amazing rejected work, which sounds really great. I don't even want to watch it. I'll watch it during the festival. And that's how it came about, and it was pretty much a tremendous success from the get-go, you know, and we began immediately discovering the next voices in independent Australian cinema. The thing that keeps me going is the fact that the industry is so static and it never changes, and that it galls me every year that they keep funding rubbish and the figures keep dropping, and the kind of people, you know, like no one goes to see Australian movies at the cinema anymore. The industry's failing. It's practically non-existent. You know, I mean, when you look at the figures of, say, American box office versus Australian, like no one sees Australian cinema. The people at the funding bodies have, and at the film, like the bigger film festivals like MIFF and the Sydney International, have totally marginalised Australian cinema to the point of it's, you know, basically irrelevant. And this galls me so much because there's so much tremendous talent here, and it is so easy to turn it around. And that if I had access to a tenth or a hundredth of the budget that was being used by Film Victoria, Screen Australia and the Melbourne International Film Festival, I would put on the best film festival this country's ever seen. I would have 20 or 30 amazing filmmakers being pushed onto the world stage every year. I look for films that are aggressive. You know, I look for films that are not politically correct. I look for films that are a bit controversial, which is the exact opposite of what they look for at the funding bodies. And subsequently, by just doing that, I've been able to discover everybody from James Wan, Greg McLean, the Spierig brothers. You know, recently the guy who did The Expendables, Patrick Hughes, Zach Hilditch, who did These Final Hours. I mean, we are the first festival in the world to play the work of these filmmakers. So, I mean, you know, how the fuck is that even possible when we exist on the catering budget of the opening night of the Melbourne International Film Festival? You know, we've always moved MUFF around a lot, but we're going to try and stay at Backlot now. I think it's got a really strong production system. The filmmakers love it. And I just think that, you know, I've become more and more focused on local Australian content. I always at least try and have half the festival is local filmmakers, you know, who can really, you know, come and support their work and get involved. And this really, really works for MUFF. And I think this is another reason why we have been becoming why we've become such a kind of, you know, outlet for the new voice in Australian cinema. So you do not need to make your film along the lines of It's Killer, but we are doing this thing called Venomous Vignettes of Villainy and Vengeance, which is a kind of, you know, MUFF version of, you know, ABCs of Death. It's going to be like a portmanteau film where, you know, you make a short along those lines on the theme of villainy and vengeance, and then you send it to MUFF, and then we, you know, pick the 10 best. We want them between 8 and 15 minutes, and we pick, say, the 10 best, and they'll make, you know, an 80-minute feature or whatever, and then we, you know, send that around the festival circuit and everything. I think that's a good way for some of these best shorts that we have every year to have a life outside of MUFF. When I first started MUFF, I wanted it to become a movement in Australian cinema of sorts, which, I mean, it sounds ridiculously ambitious, you know what I mean? And then in the sense it has become that. You know, there's so many people that are left outside of the funding bodies, and basically it's everybody who's interesting. And occasionally someone interesting gets through the funding system, but generally they don't. So it's most people who are interesting, who are making film work in this country, have had their work played at MUFF. And so that, you know, I mean, for example, Jeremy DeSegli, you know, he came to MUFF and he met Gregory Packus. And, you know, he was a writer and he'd never made a film before, and they met at MUFF, and then they went off and made Jugular. And they will happily admit that they met at MUFF, and you know, they met through the network of that festival. Then they went and made this amazing feature together, and now Jeremy DeSegli's setting up an independent distribution company. Gregory Packus is like Australia's answer to Robert De Niro. I mean, there's all this shit happening, and it's all like MUFF is at the nexus of it. So, you know, this is what I'm really proud of, is that, you know, I don't know, with no money, with just the willpower and a fucking punk fuck you attitude, we've been able to really take it to the Australian film industry and to do something that's, you know, I think that historically people will look back on and say this is when things began to change. This is when finally someone stood up to these left-wing, politically correct, cultural Marxist bastards who've been running this industry into the ground for 20 fucking years and said fuck you to them, and fuck you still, for God's sake. Fuck off, you know? Give the fucking money to some people who could actually do something with it, you know? That's my attitude.